Hello friends, my name is Michelle Fondin and I'm the author of my latest book, Chakra Healing for Vibrant Energy, exploring your 7 energy centers with mindfulness, yoga, and Ayurveda. And I'd love to welcome you to my YouTube channel and my continuing series on twin flames. Now, rest assured, there will be other videos on this channel too that do not pertain to twin flames. There are other playlists, of course, that you can watch, and past videos on health, wellness, recovery, addiction, all that jazz, as well as meditation and yoga, and the chakras, of course. So I'm going to put a timestamp down below at when the video actually does start with the material that we're going to talk about today, which is a twin flame relationship starts from the inside out. So I'm going to explain a little bit about the nature of the twin flame relationship. But first, I want to make a really exciting announcement for you guys. I want to say thank you so much for your comments, your love, your likes on my videos, your subscriptions on the YouTube channel. I'm just so incredibly excited that this channel is growing. It is one of my biggest dreams to see this channel grow, to continue to write my books, and also to do live events. And this is what I actually used to do in the past. And since my move to California, I haven't been able to do live events. And so I'm really, really excited to be able to pursue that. And the more my YouTube channel grows, of course, the more exposure I will have to actually do live events here in the LA area, Southern California area initially, and then hopefully expanding to other parts of the country. But I am actually starting a brand new podcast on my Patreon page. So if you guys aren't familiar with Patreon, Patreon is for creators. It's like a donor website. If you've ever watched like PBS stations when they do their pledge drives, this is a continual pledge drive for artists, for creators, for YouTubers, for example, because unless if you're one of the top 10 YouTubers, of course, you're not making a ton of money on YouTube, certainly not sustainable for a living, and certainly not sustainable enough to even really buy back the time and effort and equipment that goes into making YouTube videos. So a lot of creators actually go to sites like Patreon that subscribers go to pledge their support for the channel that they really love watching. And so I'm starting actually as a service to you guys, a new podcast on Patreon. I'm going to start it toward the end of May because I need enough subscribers or patrons on Patreon. That's what they're called, patrons on Patreon, in order to really start this podcast. And it's going to be a Q&A podcast. It's all about everything that I talk about on this channel: relationships, twin flame relationships, health, wellness, addiction and recovery, yoga, meditation, the chakras, spirituality, and all of those things under that umbrella. And it's going to allow you guys as patrons of Patreon to be able to have this forum, this place where you can almost consult with me, if you will. You'll send in your questions, and throughout the podcast, I will actually answer your questions on the topics that are nearest and dearest to your heart. I'll mention first names only, not last names. If you want to give an alias in your question, go ahead and give an alias in your question. And I'm going to try to answer as many questions as I can during the podcast. And then that will be hosted on the Patreon website only. So it will only be available to patrons who pledge $15 a month or more. And once I get to 20 plus patrons on Patreon who are pledging $15 or more, I will do 2 podcasts a month instead of just 1 podcast per month. And that's just a time restraint thing, honestly. I do still have a full-time job, and I'm still putting out these YouTube videos and doing a whole host of other things. You know, I do private readings, I do private consultations, I do yoga classes, I do private yoga classes. So there's a whole lot of things that I'm doing as far as creating. And so it's just a matter of having the time to be able to do that. And if you are one of the first 20 new subscribers or patrons on Patreon pledging $25 or more a month, in addition to the monthly podcasts where you can get all of your questions answered, I'm going to send you an autographed copy of Chakra Healing for Vibrant Energy. So that is if you are a new patron who pledges on Patreon, and link is below, who pledges $25 or more per month, you'll receive an autographed copy of Chakra Healing for Vibrant Energy. I can only send this in the US, in the 50 states of the US. If you do live in Canada or Mexico or another country, please consult with me about postage. It's just international rates for sending even a book are just crazy expensive. So it usually exceeds the actual cost of the book, even to send to Canada, which is totally ridiculous, I know, but that's what I've found since I am a published author and I do send books to readers who actually request my book directly through my website. And so it's always an issue when sending abroad. But I will send a free autographed copy if you are a patron within the 50 states of the United States. The postage is on me. The book price is on me. It's just to say thank you. And I will actually send that book out after the second month of pledging on Patreon. So what I'm trying to avoid are patrons who are just going to pledge the $25 for the podcast and the book and then cancel their subscription after the first month. So what I'm really trying to do is get that consistent patronage on Patreon so I can continue with this podcast, do 2 podcasts a month, plus continue to write my books and publish my books and really help you guys out and really put out this material. And really the pledging helps to support the YouTube channel. So new podcast, I am really, really super duper excited about it. And if we have enough subscribers, then really I can target the podcast more toward those who subscribe, and I'll get your feedback on really what your topic of interest is as a general whole. And then I can custom tailor the podcast to really fit that theme maybe for that month and answer your questions along that theme. So I'm really, really excited about doing that podcast. If you guys have been following me for a long time, you know that my son and I, we did a bachelorette podcast called On a Cloud, which is no longer up. I just didn't continue to pay the subscription fee to have the podcast up, but it was super duper funny. Really enjoyed doing that with my son Matthew, but he's off in college and really hard material, and so it's hard for him to study and do the podcast and just have his life and not being able to do the podcast with mom. But it was so much fun. So I really like doing podcasts as well as videos, but I'm very excited to be able to offer this to you guys as you pledge your support on Patreon and get something in return, like get something extra in return for pledging your support for this YouTube channel. So thank you so much. Let's continue on with our series about twin flames. So one of the things that has come up, and it's been a consistent theme that has come up in the comments and emails to me, as I mentioned, I do private readings, so this theme seems to be a recurring theme that tends to come up in these questions that tend to come up in this twin flame journey. Now, as I always say, remember you guys, I'm going through this twin flame journey real time as you guys are also going through this. Now, some of you may already be in union with your twin flame. Some of you may be in separation with your twin flame. Some of you may be in union and then in separation and then union again, and you might be getting a little bit frustrated with the whole process. So I have always known about soulmate relationships. I've always known about, soul connection relationships. And since I have been in a fair amount of committed relationships and I was married for a while, I do know a lot about relationships since I went through marriage counseling and a lot of marriage conferences to try to work out relationships, and I've read a lot of books on relationships and marriage, and so I do know a fair amount about the ins and outs of relationships and how to make a relationship work. And let me just tell you this, that all the advice that's given to you in relationship books and relationship seminars and relationship counseling, they do tend to work, but they do tend to work on a very slow level, and usually those are designed for more karmic or soulmate type relationships where problems tend to crop up and creep up, and it's on a very ego-based level and on a very codependent level, meaning that the love that's in these types of relationships, it doesn't make it wrong. It's the nature of the relationships is that it tends to be a very conditional type of love. So it's always like the give and take, and like it's conditional upon, like, if you do A, B, and C, then I'll do D, E, and F. And it's always this tendency to push and pull, and this tendency of the polarity, but it's always like there's always seems to be an underlying tension and this underlying work that needs to be done within the confines of the relationship. And so since it's so much work in the confines of a normal relationship, many people give up, and that's why our divorce rate is so incredibly high. You know, it's well above 50% for first marriages, and I think it's well above 80% for second and subsequent marriages. So it's really, really high, because when you work through a relationship in this nature, in this manner, and you're working from the ego and not from spirit, it's a lot of work, because you're always being careful of not stepping on the other person's ego and not getting your ego stepped upon. And with all these conditions and rules and, you know, compromises, and so relationships in that nature are really tough. And, you know, some people go through years of counseling or many relationship books and seminars before they can actually come to a more spiritual connection. So that is going from the outside in. And that's what I call it. It's like fixing the relationship from the outside and letting it grow from the outside. And when you reach maturity in the relationship, when you finally figured it out, which sometimes can take 5, 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 years of a relationship, if it lasts that long, then you come to the spiritual ascension of the relationship in what is referred to, and I refer to this actually in my book, Chakra Healing for Vibrant Energy, in the area of the heart chakra. And I refer to it as, the Greek term is agape. And agape is that unconditional love, that agape is like that pure love, that love of God, that unconditional loving, really deep, mature love. And all of us want to reach agape, because relationships, as I mentioned, are not easy. It's not easy dealing with a person's ego and personality and needs and wants and desires, and then dealing with your own. It's hard enough to deal with your own stuff, right? And so as you progress in a relationship that's a karmic or soulmate fit, when you're still dealing with heavy ego on both sides, we're not just talking on one side, but we're really dealing with heavy ego on both sides, then it can really take a super long time for you to reach that agape love, that really mature love, that spiritual love. Twin flame relationships work in the complete opposite way. The complete opposite way. And I like to say to my clients, take a regular relationship, a karmic relationship, a romantic relationship, that any relationship you can think of that you've had in your past, and you're going to actually flip it all upside down. You're just going to flip it on its end, because that's actually how a twin flame relationship works. And I like to say a twin flame relationship is like a soulmate relationship on steroids, like on major, 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 major steroids. And it's because the twin flame relationship starts on a spiritual level first, and then you need to figure out how to be human. And then you need to figure out how this is going to work out in the physical, in real life, so to speak. And so it seems that this generation of twin flame couples that are coming together, because it's not like twin flame couples are something new. It's something that those of us in this journey now in 2019, maybe in 2018, 2019, and going into 2020, it seems that those of us who are experiencing this now are in a new wave or new generation of twin flames. So it seems, and this is, I'm just going by what I have heard, it seems that twin flames of the past came together and were together, and they worked through the things that twin flames must work through, but they worked through it while still together. So they might have had an initial push-pull in the beginning, but the separation was nothing like we, in this current generation of twin flames, this kind of separation that we're experiencing now. So it really appears that in the past, what happened was it looked like a karmic relationship or a soulmate relationship on steroids, And there was so much pain. There was so much mirroring. And that's what happens in a twin flame relationship. It's like your twin flame holds up a mirror to you, mirroring back all of your insecurities, all of your stuff, all of the things that you're afraid of, all of the things that push your buttons, and they do it magnified by like 100. And so that is why the pain is so incredibly great in a twin flame union. It feels really, 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 really good because you have that spiritual connection. And then it feels really, 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 really bad because they're magnifying as a mirror back to you, because it's your soul. Remember, this person is your soul. They're mirroring back to you everything you've ever had as an insecurity, everything that you've ever had as a fear, everything that you've ever had as a suppressed emotion, everything that you've ever had as childhood wounds. And a while back in some of my videos, I talked about imago therapy. And it's super interesting because this book was actually written in the early 80s. And this book was recommended to me. And so I started reading it and it was super fascinating. I really love the principle of it. But now, like, I didn't know anything about twin flames back then, and this was not in the 80s. It was just like a year ago that it was recommended, or like 2 years ago that it was recommended to me. But I did some videos on imago therapy. And you can look back on, I don't know if it's in any playlist, but it's certainly there on relationship health or imago therapy, even it's called. Imago therapy is exactly like a twin flame relationship, because it is basically you pick a partner that is your mirror and that holds up the mirror to you. Imago meaning image. And so it's almost like you pick a partner who's going to mirror back to you all of your childhood wounds. And that's exactly what a twin flame does. The twin flame reflects back to you your pain, reflects back to you your insecurities, reflects back to you your childhood wounds. So it seems that in this generation of twin flames, that's happening, but it seems to be happening more in the separation. So the healing of that mirroring is taking place more in the separation than it is in the union. And I believe because so many twin flames are awakening and because so many twin flames are coming together in union at this particular moment and at this particular time, it's that because of the connotation of a normal karmic or soulmate relationship, because the connotation of like, well, we really need to go to therapy and work this out if we're having some problems and issues with our relationship, or we really need to consult some relationship books, or we really need to go to these marital seminars and work our things out. So because for a twin flame relationship that doesn't tend to work, I believe that God in his infinite intelligence said, you know, what I would like to do to display this unconditional love of this relationship is that in this wave of relationships of twin flames that are coming together now in this journey during 2018, 2019, 2020, I'm going to have their spiritual growth and their growth of healing these wounds. I'm going to have it happen in separation, so that when they do come together, they're better equipped to handle that mirroring. So it's kind of like a time of purging of all of the wounds that you have and all the insecurities that you have and all of preconceived notions of what a relationship is supposed to look like. Like everything in that is going to be healed during the time of separation. And that certainly is what is happening with me and what has been happening with me. And the more I hear from you guys, the more I understand that that is exactly what is happening with you guys as well, is that all this stuff keeps coming up. Like it just keeps surfacing and it just keeps coming up and it's coming up to be healed. And it seems like, okay, I'm done now. Like I'm all done. Like I think I'm good. And then once you think you're good, then more stuff comes out. And this often happens when you're in separation with your twin flame, and then you guys come back together for a brief moment, even if it's just for a conversation, even if it's just for a text message, a phone call, a conversation, maybe you meet briefly in person, and then you separate again. There was something that happened in that text message, conversation, personal meeting, whatever it was. Like, there's something that happens that triggers another thing that you need to heal. And so then you go back into separation to heal that. And so that seems to be what is actually happening. So the growth is actually happening inside of you, and the growth is happening from the inside out, so that when you emerge from this growth, that you are coming out of this with a lot more understanding. You're coming out of this with a lot more empathy, compassion, and unconditional love. And really, that's what you need to do, as I talked about in my last video and the video before that, right? It's like coming out of this with that unconditional love. So what I like to look at it, and I thought of this example earlier, and it's like the caterpillar in the chrysalis. It's really the caterpillar in the chrysalis. The caterpillar is in that chrysalis, or the cocoon, right? The caterpillar is transformed into a butterfly during that time that it needs to be in the cocoon. And so all of that transformation is taking place. And if that butterfly comes out too soon, it's not going to be fully developed. And if you try to force the cocoon open, then the butterfly's wings are not going to dry out the way they need to dry out. And so its wings are not going to be functional. So you need to look at the growth in separation from your twin flame as that. You're the caterpillar in the chrysalis, and you are developing and growing and transforming and changing. And you need this time to grow and transform and change. And I know it is so incredibly painful, and you wouldn't believe, like, even with myself, like, how many questions I've gotten from you guys, like these wonderful questions. And I know it's so hard. And we have social media, and we have like Instagram and Snapchat and Facebook and Twitter and all these different forms of social media, that it's easy to track your twin flame, even if you are in separation. And I would say don't do that. I stay away from any of that. And I know it's really easy to Google someone and see what they're up to, and, just try to stay away from that as much as possible, because as much as you are growing and transforming in order to come back into union with your twin flame, you've got to believe that your twin flame too is growing and transforming in his or her own way. And so you can't speed up that growth any more than you can speed up your own growth. And just know that when the growth has come to its culmination, in whichever way it's necessary, like, it's going to be necessary to come to the end of the growth cycle in order for you guys to come together. When it's time, in divine timing, it will actually be time to do that. I would just say to you is that don't look at the time of separation is a time to blame your twin flame, and especially the divine masculine. And as I always explain in my videos, and I've explained this to my clients, is that the divine feminine is always a few steps ahead of the divine masculine. Why? I don't know. That's just the way God designed it. And even in the classroom, girls are usually a few steps ahead of the boys in the classroom. I was a trained teacher. I know this. My mother was a teacher. She knows this. They recommend to teachers to actually give boys like a few more seconds to raise their hand and answer a question, because a girl is, a young lady is usually going to have the answer a little bit quicker. And that doesn't mean that the boys are less intelligent. It just means that the processing is different. And so teachers are usually advised in teaching school just to like wait a few extra seconds before calling on a student, to allow the boys that time to absorb and actually raise their hand and like answer that question. So it's the same way. So for the divine feminine, whether you're a boy or girl in gender, that doesn't really matter. But for the divine feminine, you are typically a few steps ahead in spirituality and the spiritual awakening than your divine masculine. So just give it time and Don't use this time to blame them, to shame them, to guilt them into believing that they're not growing fast enough or that they're not transforming fast enough and they're not living the lifestyle that you want them to live, because again, that's going back into a codependent karmic type of relationship, and that's not what this is about. It's not about you trying to control the other person or guilt the other person into doing what you want them to do. You want them to develop into their own being in order to be a competent whole person, to come together on this agape level of love, this more spiritual level of love. And that's what you want. You do not want a karmic relationship in this relationship. You do not want to control your divine masculine. You don't want to try to change or transform your divine masculine. You want to love your divine masculine the way that he is. And you want to love yourself the way that you are. It's not about trying to change or transform the other person. It's about acceptance. It's about accepting that person as they are on their journey. And it's about you accepting yourself as you are on your journey. And so be very, 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 very careful about judging your divine masculine, no matter where they are in their journey. Don't judge them. And this is like something that if you're new on this journey, that it's so hard to wrap your brain around. It's so, so hard to wrap your brain around this. It's like, well, I've seen them on Facebook and like they're drinking with their friends and they might be at a bar, or like he's taking a picture at a game and he's surrounded by two beautiful women, and like all this stuff that's going on in your head, and you're just thrown completely for a loop, and you're like, this person's not changing, this person's not growing, look at me, I'm doing all this work and I'm growing and I'm changing. So that's like placing judgment on them, and you don't want to place judgment on them. Their growth pattern is going to be totally different than yours, and that doesn't mean that they're not growing. It doesn't mean that they're not transforming. It doesn't mean that they're not changing. It just means that their growth is going to look a little bit different. In order for you guys to come together, instead of placing so much focus on their growth and what they need to do to change, in order for you guys to come into union, you need to turn that internally. So remember, the growth is from the inside out. So turn that back inside on yourself and say, what do I need to do to grow and to change? Like, what do I need to do to work through my own insecurities, to work through my own self-doubt, to work through my own spiritual growth, to work through my own stuff that keeps coming up, my wounds from childhood? What do I need to do to work through that? And so each time you want to judge your twin flame, go back to yourself, because you guys are so intimately linked and your souls speak to one another all the time. If you are in a place of judgment and you are not refocused on your own internal growth, your twin flame is feeling that judgment. Your twin flame is feeling that tension, that stress of you wanting to precipitate the union so much that you're coming from a place of impatience. You're coming from a place of, as I mentioned, judgment. You're coming from a place of wanting to change them or controlling them. And that is going to keep your twin flame from you, and they're just going to keep running and running and running and running and not want to change and transform. But as a divine feminine, if you go back to that place of internal growth and go, what do I need to do to change and transform myself in order to become more loving, compassionate, empathetic, and giving and receiving? Because that's really important. It's about receiving as well. Like receiving, being able to receive divine grace, being able to receive divine attention and affection. And it doesn't have to come from your twin flame. It can come from God, because that's where your joy comes from. And really focusing on your own spiritual practices. So it's not about focusing on what my twin flame is doing right now. It's like, am I meditating twice a day? Do I even know how to meditate? Am I using prayer? Am I reading spiritual literature? Am I focusing on giving, like giving back to others, like random acts of kindness? Am I volunteering my time? Am I going to church or going to synagogue or wherever you go to worship? Am I helping someone in need? So just like go back to your own spiritual growth so that when you emerge from your cocoon, you're emerging from a much better place. You're emerging from a much more solid ground. You're emerging from a place of love, compassion, empathy. And so that when you emerge from this place, you will never have to point your finger at your twin flame and be like, why aren't you doing A, B, or C so I can do D, E, and F for you? You know, it's like you're never, ever, ever again going to live out a relationship that is based on conditional love, because this relationship is not about that. So just try to get that out of your head and work on that. That might be the last piece of the puzzle, right, guys? Like that might be the last piece that you need to work through, is not considering that this relationship is like all the other relationships, because as much as you may have loved the person in your previous relationships, you know that it didn't work. Like whatever you were doing didn't work, or you would still be in that relationship. And if you are in that relationship and it is not working, or you are in that relationship and you've met your twin flame and you see the strong spiritual connection that you have with your twin flame, and your current relationship doesn't have that basis of spirituality or unconditional love in it, and it's very codependent or conditional, then you know the difference, right? You're starting to see the difference. The difference is starting to emerge in you, and so you're starting to know. And that is your own growth. So just think about that this week, you guys. Like think about, what can I do to enhance my own spiritual growth? What can I do to work on healing my childhood wounds? What can I do to like honor my ego, but then slip away from the ego and move into spirit? And what can I do to extend grace, love, and compassion and empathy to my twin flame, to my divine masculine? Because it's only through extending that grace, extending that kindness, extending that empathy, that you will get that person back. There's no other way. There's absolutely no other way. You can't judge them. It's about giving grace. And I always take this back to the grace that Jesus gives us, is like Jesus died for our sins when we did not deserve it. We didn't deserve it, and that's grace right there. That's grace and mercy. It's like, it was so merciful that we did not deserve it. And so just think about anything that you have done throughout your life that, man, you did not deserve to have grace, but maybe somebody extended that grace to you and you were so grateful. So that's the kind of grace that, as you're working through this in your little cocoon, in your chrysalis, just work on extending that grace. And when you emerge as that beautiful butterfly that you are, you'll know, oh, okay, this is what this is. This is what everyone in a twin flame relationship has been talking about. Like, I get it now. I get it. And so that's what we're all about. And that's what we're extending to the world. And that's what we're extending to others. And that's what others will see. And that's how relationships in and of themselves will be transformed for the better. So we can start coming together in union as a whole, versus having the tragedy of so many broken relationships and broken families that are happening today and have been happening for the past century. So thank you so much for joining me. Thank you for subscribing to my channel below. Hit like and hit the notification bell so that you can receive notifications on my upcoming videos. Share this video with other twin flames, other twin flame couples, or divine feminine or divine masculine. And thank you for pledging your support on Patreon, www.patreon.com/Michelle S. Fondin. And I will see you in the next video.